How's it going? My name is Steven, and this is a complete overview, comprehensive guide of Fusion 360 for 2024. And if you don't know already, Fusion 360 is free for personal use. And you can tell by all these questions that people are asking, people are a little bit confused whether or not Fusion 360 is still free. And it is still free for personal use. However, you have to search on Google Fusion 360 free for personal use. And this will take you to this link right here. And you can see they're really trying to wrap you into their subscription. However, over here, we have the free for personal use version. So if you click this button, you'll have to create an Autodesk account, and then you could download Fusion 360. So when you open up Fusion 360 for the first time, it should look something like this. Now in Fusion 360, there are two ways to create three-dimensional objects. The first way is you go to Create, and you can start from some primitives or some just basic shapes. So let's say we want to create a box. So simply click on a box here, and now it's going to ask us which plane or surface to create that three-dimensional box on. So let's just go ahead and select the ground plane right here. And now if you click here, it'll snap to the origin point. And if you drag out, we can set the dimensions for the length and width of our box. If you press Tab on your keyboard, you can switch between the two dimensions. So in this case, I could type in 42, press Tab, and then press 42 again, and then press Enter. And now we have to set the height. So you either drag this arrow right here, or you can go over here and type in your dimension. And you can go ahead and click OK. So now we've created a box. So how do we actually navigate around the scene? Well, I'm on a Mac laptop, so I use two fingers and drag on the touchpad. But if you're using a 3-button mouse, hold the middle mouse button to pan side to side and up and down. And you hold Shift and the middle mouse button to orbit around the object. Alternatively, you could use these shortcuts down here as well. There's also the view cube, where you could easily snap to certain angles and view the object like that. So now we have an object, but how can we modify this three-dimensional object or body? You can see right here, there's a drop down for bodies, and this is our body. So we could rename it by double clicking or right clicking and going to rename, and we could just call this box 1. So how do we modify box 1? Well, there's a few different ways, but one way is basically the same way that we created the box. Go up to Create, and let's say we want to add a hole down into our box. And you might see this option here for a hole. However, an easier way is just to create a cylinder. So if you just click on the cylinder, and now we have to select a surface to create the cylinder on. So let's create the cylinder on this top surface right here. And if you hover your mouse over this edge here, you'll see this blue triangle appear. And that will snap it to the center point, and it will create this guideline. You can see the dashed guideline there. And if we snap to the midpoint of this line here, it'll create another guideline. And if we drag it here, you can see we get the intercept of both guidelines. So let's create the cylinder right there. And now we have to select the diameter of this circle. So let's do 8.6. Press Enter. And now we have an option here of we can either drag it up or down. And you can see when I drag it down, it turns red, which means it's subtracting the cylinder from our box. Also, if I go up, you can see we're now joining it, and it's creating some sort of post on top of it. So if you go over here, you can see there's a thing called the operation. And you can either join, cut, or get the intersects, or you can create a new body or a component. In this case, we want to create a hole, so it automatically knows that we want to cut since it's going through our box. And it doesn't matter if we go past it or anything like that, because it's just subtracting the cylinder for the entire length of the box. Now go ahead and click OK. And now we've created our first custom object using Fusion 360. But how can we see what the dimensions of this object are? Well, if we select on one of these edges here, and you go down to the bottom right, you can see it says 42 millimeters. So we know that this line here is 42 millimeters. We could also get the distance between surfaces. So if we select the top surface, rotate around and select the bottom surface by holding Shift, you can see the distance between these two surfaces is also 42 millimeters. Now, what if we don't want to use millimeters and you want to use inches? Well, you go up to Document Settings right here, open this drop down, click on this right here, and you could change the units to anything you want. Let's say inches, and you click OK. And now when I select on this edge, you can see it's 1.654 inches. However, for 3D printing, most things are designed in millimeters. So I'm going to leave it in millimeters. So this is the first way we could create an object, and we could also modify the object as well by creating other objects and either subtracting other objects from it or adding other objects to it. But we could also manually move faces. So if we right click on this face here and go to Move Copy, we could drag on this thing right here, and we can either rotate it, or we could drag this right here like that. I'm going to cancel this because I don't want to do that. But you can do it in a more precise way as well. So once again, you click on the surface you want to move, and you can go to Move Copy right here. And see this point right here? This is the pivot point. So we could change this pivot point. So let's say we want to make this angled out. We can set this pivot point by going to here. So now we are selecting a new pivot point. So let's say I want to have it pivot along this top edge. I can select right there, and I have to click on this green check mark right here. So now the new pivot point has been set, and now we could give it an angle. So let's say we want this to be a 45-degree angle. So now we have a 45-degree angle that is pivoted along this edge right here. And we could go ahead and click OK. So here we have our custom object. So that's basically the first way to create a three-dimensional object in Fusion 360. It's by creating basic primitive shapes and then modifying those shapes with other shapes or by moving faces. Now, there's another way to create the exact same object as well. This is by using a two-dimensional sketch. So the second way of creating three-dimensional objects is you start with a 2D sketch and you extrude it into the third dimension, kind of like this picture right here shows. So let's go ahead and create a sketch, and it's a very similar process. We need to select which surface to create the sketch on. So once again, let's select the floor plane here. And now instead of creating primitive shapes that are three-dimensional, we're creating primitive shapes that are two-dimensional, like a drawing. That would be on a piece of paper. So in this case, we could create a rectangle, and we could start once again at the origin point. And same thing, you could type in the dimensions and press Tab to switch between the dimensions. And now we have a square. So if we want to, so we could also think ahead, and we know that we want to create a hole in our shape. So we could create a circle right in the middle. Except, how do we get the circle to go right into the middle? Well, we could create some guidelines, and we could just create a basic line right here. Once again, we can snap to the midpoint when you see the blue triangle and drag it across like so. And now we have a line that is going from this midpoint to this midpoint. And if we click on this line, we could change it from a solid line to a construction line. So now it's kind of a guideline. And we can do the same thing in the vertical direction. Create a line from the top, snap from midpoint to midpoint, and we could change it to a construction line. So now that we have our guidelines in place, we could create a circle right here. And once again, I'm going to do 8.6 millimeters and press OK. So here we have our sketch, and it's what's called fully constrained. All the lines are black. So for example, if I create a rectangle out here in no man's land, not connected to anything, I didn't anchor it to the origin point or anything, you can see I can still change the dimensions of this shape like so. This one here, if I try to move anything, everything is locked in place and all of these lines are black, which means it's fully constrained, and that is the correct way to make a sketch. Over here, it's very easy for your shape to get messed up, and if you want to change the dimensions in the future, everything is not accurate at all, and this is basically not constrained at all, except for these here are actually constraints. These are horizontal and vertical constraints. So if I deleted these constraints, this shape is completely unconstrained, and now I should be able to just move it like so. There is actually this constraint as well, which connects these 2 points together. So when you're designing your objects in Fusion 360, and you're making sketches, it's best practice to keep your design fully constrained like this, because let's say we want to change dimensions of that, you can easily change it in the future, and it's just one of the coolest features of Fusion 360. It's called parametric modeling. So let's go ahead and click Finish Sketch, and now we could take our two-dimensional sketch here and we can extrude it 42 millimeters, and now we have our three-dimensional object. But what if we want to create that same angled piece that we had before? Well, we could click on this face, right-click, and go to Move Copy. Or what we could do is we could select on this face here, and we could create a new sketch on this face, and basically draw that 45-degree. This will be a area or face, and then we could extrude it 42 millimeters. So now we have this triangle. Go ahead and click Finish Sketch. Select the area here, and now we can extrude it. And while you're extruding, you can simply snap to a point like so. So once again, I've dragged this arrow, and I could even rotate around here. And once you're dragging the arrow, you can release and then click on a surface and it will snap to it like so. And that is the second way to create the exact same object. So you can see here are the two objects that we have created. So now let's say we want to export this object for 3D printing. Well, it's really easy. All you have to do is right click on the body right here and go to Save as Mesh. And this is where you can save it as an STL file. And there's a choice between a binary and ASCII, and I always use STL binary. You can set the refinement to high, medium, low, or custom, but usually for simple shapes, high is fine and the file size won't be too big at all. And then just simply go ahead and click OK and save it to your computer as you normally would with an STL file. Now let's look into some other really cool features of Fusion 360. Down here, we have the timeline. The timeline is a really powerful tool, and it's I'll show you exactly how it works right here. So basically, you can go back in time to any command that you did in the past and change certain features. So let's say we go, I'm going to turn on both bodies here, and let's say we want to change the size of the first hole that we created. So if I select on this hole right here, you can see little 3 dashed lines show up right there. Now, if we double click on this cylinder shape here, we could change the diameter to, let's say, 12.6. You can see it automatically changes. And if we click OK, now we have the new shape or the new size of the hole, and everything updates automatically. Now for this one, if we click on it, it shows that it's the extrude command, which it is because that's the sketch that we extruded up. So in this case, we would have to go back into this sketch here. So you could double click on that sketch, and we could just change the dimension here to something like 12.6 once again. And we click Finish Sketch. So now we've modified our objects by using the timeline feature down here. Now let's say we want to align these objects in our workspace. Well, what we could do is go over here, and let's go ahead and move box 1, and let me rename this as box 2. Now let's move box 1 so we could go and basically click on this and right click it and go to Move Copy. And here we can set our pivot point once again by clicking the Set Pivot button there. And let's just set it right here to this face. Click the green check mark. And now we could drag this object and snap it to that space, to that face right there. And go ahead and click OK. So now we have two objects that are next to each other, but how can we join them together? Well, if we select both of these objects right here, we can go up to the Combine tool, which is also used for subtracting as well. And we could click on this and change the operation to join. And then click OK. So now we have one object like so. So now what if we want to subtract objects from each other? So let's say I've created some sort of cylinder. I'm just going to click right here, and then I'm just going to, I'll just place it in the origin point right here. And maybe it's 22.2 millimeters. And maybe it goes down -15. So let's say we have a new body. So I could just create the hole like that. But let's say we have a body like so. We have the cylinder here, and you want to cut it from box 1. So what we could do is you could click on box 1, so the object you want to cut from. Then you select the object that you are using to cut. So the object we want to cut from, and then the object we're using to cut. And go ahead and click the Combine tool once again. It's a little bit confusing that it's called Combine when it's also used to subtract, but that's what they decided to call it. And now we can select the operation to cut and click OK. And now we've cut that cylinder out of our shape. So those are the basic features of Fusion 360, and that should get you started. A couple of last finishing touch type tools that you could use are over here under Modify. So if we want to add a chamfer to a surface or an edge, you can select on the face and go to Modify, and we can add a chamfer. Now if we type in 1 or maybe 2, now you can see we've added a chamfer. So why would you want to add a chamfer to the bottom of your designs? Well, a lot of the times it helps with elephant's foot, where the part that connects to your 3D printer's build plate kind of expands out. So you can add a chamfer to the bottom of your parts like so, and it also helps release the part from your build plate as well. Another thing similar to a chamfer is a fillet. So let's say we want to round off this edge right here. You can go up here to Fillet, and you can type in something like 10, and then you can click OK. So really quick, when you're finished with your design, you obviously want to save it. So in Fusion 360, all of the files are saved in Autodesk's cloud. So the project we're working on is technically called a design, and I could open this drop down here. So you can see we have projects which kind of act like folders. So if I have a tutorial project right here. So now I'm in my tutorials project folder. I can save my design as tutorial number 2, and I can click save. So that will save on the Autodesk cloud. You could also save onto your computer as well, but by default it saves to the cloud. If you open up here, this is the data panel where you can see all of your recent projects, or if you click the home button right here, you can see all of your projects. Before that was the design. So if I open up a project folder, here are the design files, I guess I would call them. But yeah, so that is how Fusion 360 organizes your files. And if you're using the free version, this is really important to note as well. I believe you're only allowed to have a certain number of active projects. And it doesn't mean you can't have infinite projects. You can only have, I think, 5 or 10 active projects at once. And there'll be a button somewhere right here that'll say convert to read only or make active or something like that. I forget what it looks like on the free version, but just know that you might have to make certain projects read only when you're done with them and then make them active. But you can still have unlimited projects, just only 5 or 10, I forget what it is, active projects at once. So that is a complete overview of Fusion 360, and I hope this helps you on your 3D printing journey. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer all of your questions. Once again, my name is Steven. Thanks for watching, and happy printing.